we know that climate change has been much more severe in the poorest countries, poorest communities, small island states, and indigenous peoples. And they also happen to be the black and brown people of the world. So it's a racial injustice. Secondly, there's a gender dimension very clearly in that. Different social roles of women, different power, or rather lack of power, different access to credit, etc. And yet they have to be put food on the table, make their communities resilient. And the third injustice is the one that young people are very vocal on now and calling us out on, which I'm glad about, because they see they're not going to have a safe future unless we deal with the problems now. And the injustice against nature. What I'm also hearing, and heard it very clearly at the Mo Ibrahim Forum, is Africa doesn't want to be considered just a victim. Africa also is contributing hugely to mitigation of carbon through the forests, for example, in Africa. If we had a proper price on carbon, Africa would benefit enormously.
What are the main hurdles to overcome and challenges to address when it comes to unleashing the potential of Africa as a key resource for global energy transition?
We know the climate crisis has affected disproportionately. Then COVID came along and we didn't have fair and equitable access to vaccines. So that put a heavy burden on governments. And then we had rising costs exacerbated now by this war in Europe. The invasion by Russia of Ukraine is distorting food and fuel and fertilizer prices, and African countries are suffering disproportionately again because of a dependence on importing food. It's a lesson to Africa to produce far more food locally, partly for climate reasons, because the long supply chains across oceans, that also has a huge emissions. That's a big part of the carbon problem, the shipping or the air transport. That's part of these long globalized supply chains.
If you were to give us 2 or 3 key recommendations to leverage Africa's potential while ensuring the preservation of its environment, what would they be?
There is a commitment to double adaptation finance, but actually if we had the proper target, we'd know that's not nearly enough. We have to go far above that. 100 billion is only, implementing a way of de-risking to bring in the trillions that are needed, including significantly to help Africa to have energy justice, a fair, equitable access. And I found the same messages at the Sustainable Energy for All and the same involvement of young people, I'm glad to say. And it just makes a difference. I think it has the makings of a good COP if African leaders come bringing a lot of the messaging that we've heard at this Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and including a self-acknowledgement that there has to be a step up on governance.
A lot of people are frustrated when they see that there are all these meetings and they say there is no big concrete change afterwards. For example, what sort of impact has the person on the ground in Africa seen after a big meeting like COP26? And what needs to be evaluated this year at COP27?
I have to say there were at least some important issues dealt with at COP26. One was that we can't wait another 5 years or 3 years for the big emitters, the G20 countries, to increase their ambition, because we're not on track for a safe world. On one of the last days, Climate Action Tracker came out with a report that said if all the pledges made before and at COP26 were implemented, we would still be on course for a 2.4 degree world. And of course, they're not being implemented, and we're on course for a worse world now. We need a strong, unified African voice demanding of those who've been emitting most, both historic and the countries like China, India, Russia, that are current, and Saudi Arabia, that are big emitters now. It is really important that we seize the innovative ideas, and the fact that a lot of the minerals for a green economy for the world are in Africa. They mustn't be extracted and exploited out of Africa elsewhere. They must be developed in Africa with clean energy. And that can all be done if there is proper financing. And that financing is slower, partly because of good governance reasons. So it's all tied in together. And I have great hopes for Africa because of its youth.